Welcome to The Room, where real talk becomes real faith. Today, we're asking, has the church lost its relevance, or is it still the unshakable foundation God intended it to be? In a world that's constantly shifting, what role does the church play in truth, community, and purpose? My name is Ashley, and today we have Braylon, Isaac, and Brandon. You may hear some things that are not the direct viewpoint of Now Word Covenant Church. The intent is that this will spark conversation and biblical research in your personal circle. So grab your Bibles, open your hearts, and let's break it down with scripture, real talk, and zero fluff. This is the church, outdated institution or unshakable foundation. All right, roomies, so I think we can agree that before we can talk about if the church is outdated, we really should talk about what defines the church. More specifically, is it a building, community, a movement?
That's one of the things that I was looking at when I was just researching, getting started, heard the topic. I was like, okay, so how do we define this thing? Like, what is the church? A lot of times we hear like we are the church, right? The believers. And I think that comes from like when it was translated from the Greek, right? There was, I think it's called iglesia. I think that's correct pronunciation. But it's translated to like the called out assembly, right? So an assembly of believers that are called out of the world to live like Christ. And that's the church, right? The called out believers. So it's an assembly of believers. But the church is also a building, right? Where we go to assemble. But I think it's important to distinguish between those two. Like right now, are we talking about the building itself? Or are we talking about the assembly of believers when we're asking this question?
Yeah, and I think we'll definitely kind of bounce back and forth between, at least I think it's a pretty, I don't want to say hot topic, but I think, no pun intended, but it's a really relevant topic right now, considering, the general age of churches and trying to compete with the new I don't want to say compete, but new believers versus maybe a little bit more traditional.
Yeah, I would say the church overall, first and foremost, would probably be a community, right? So the church can live in a building, right? And the community of people can do a movement, but at the highest point, it's really a community of people who are coming together, right? So I like how you said ecclesia, like the one of those who are called out from the world, called out from a lot of different things. We can talk about that, of course, right? But at the end of the day, I think it's a community of people, and I think that those people need to spend time together to reinforce each other as well as part of that community. So you can use that term community is used in a lot of different facets. We have community groups. We have all types of things that we do within the church and outside the church, right? In the professional world. But overall, I think community is like the biggest topic there when it comes to the church overall.
As we're already saying, it's very important for us to truly define what the church really is, because we can get into different avenues of discussing, is the church still relevant, right? Is the building the church still relevant, or is the local body still relevant? And like we already said, I think we'll get into that in this episode, but you'll probably hear both different sides, if we're being honest. So I'm very excited to get into this one.
There's no other way to help us kind of transition than asking, one, have you ever personally questioned your relationship with the church? And then kind of a side question after that is, what experiences have shaped your view as maybe the church being outdated or unshakable, right? Like, where do you stand? And
so I personally never, I think I'm blessed enough to never really question my relationship with the church, the building or the community. And as I look back and reflect on my life, I think I am in a very blessed situation and blessed upbringing, if you will. But so as I was preparing for this, I was doing some research, trying to figure out what people are saying about the church, and I came across a lot of different things that, if I'm being honest, opened up my eyes. Because like I said, I can't really relate, if you will. But what I noticed was a lot of the things that people were saying were about a version of the church, not necessarily the church that Jesus built, if that makes sense, right? So there was a big thing that I saw about hypocrisy, right? Jesus specifically speaks about or speaks against hypocrisy in the church, right? And so that's where I think for us as believers and us who are trying to continue the church and continue God's church, we need to line ourselves up with the scriptures, make sure that we're walking correctly, so that way we could be the correct light in this world.
Yeah, I would echo some of your things. I've, gone to church my entire life. And, once you come to like your time in your life where you have to make your own decisions, it felt kind of natural that I would just continue like being involved in a community at a church. But there was a time in my life where I was working on Sundays. I was kind of like, I've talked about that season of my life before where I wasn't really super in my word and diligent, and I was kind of lukewarm. And I didn't go to church. I didn't fellowship with believers very often. And I would say that I wanted to get back to it. And PK talks about all the time, like when there is something, some sort of inkling inside of you, that's God, right? Not necessarily your flesh that wants to be a part of that. And I would say that when people are like in this space, there is a desire for something different outside of like what you do every single day. Maybe you have had experience like being a part of a church, that community, or maybe you are just looking for something different. And there is something inside that like people want to be a part of it. So I would say that I don't think the church is outdated. I think it is a mainstay in our world, in our fallen world right now. But to Braylon's point, we have a duty and an obligation to live and have church the way it's supposed to be had, right? And we're going to talk about some of the things that, we've researched and saw. But I think that's the biggest thing right now is like the church hurt, or the things that have the hypocrisy, things that have gone wrong, that is turning people off. It's like, oh, that church is like that, so all church is like that as well.
My first experience of attending regular church that was non-denominational was Noward Covenant Church. And how it's different is Catholic is very, right, like routine and lots of traditions, and you do this, and then this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And you kind of go, and you're like, okay, yeah, you're early in the morning, yawning, take communion. Okay, yes, we're almost done. And then coming here, you understand that God is an important part of it, like that part of the worship doesn't change. But coming to Now Word, and I would say what helped that transition, and I can see where on the other side it's changing, or how people in the world can question that it's outdated, is because this younger generation, including us, we no longer take things at face value versus maybe the generations ahead of us, right? You were told to do something and you do it, right? Jesus is Lord, you're going to hell if you don't. And you're like, oh, that, and which is an important part, I think, of the faith and religion. But as we are coming and we're getting older, this generation is now, but why? Why can't I take a few Sundays off? Why can't I go to brunch with my friends? Why do I have to tithe every Sunday? Why do I have to do this? And you miss that part of, that's also an important part of your walk, is learning these things, not just accepting things at face value, because that's kind of what faith is. You're told something and you believe it. No questions asked because you believe in God. But then there's also the extra piece to help explain and build that relationship and understanding. So I can see, and I kind of went through that. I like not questioning a lot of things, but like some things like, oh, like why, like you mentioned coming into faith on your own, and where you kind of broke off, and mine was kind of like, again, but why? Like, why are there no exceptions to the rule? Why this? And now that I'm further, I understand the importance and the relevancy of the church, but we were kind of missing that bridge. And maybe because I didn't have the net in Crosswalk, and I didn't go through those, which are our high school and young adult ministries, to kind of help bridge that gap. But I can see where that's missing right now.
I agree. I think you hit on a really key point there when it comes to the meaning of church historically versus what it is now. So if you look back in history, church used to be a center focal point. It was the reason why, like, a couple hundred years ago, we would do in conquest. You're going in the name of whoever, right, to go do these types of things. The center of the city was the church, right? Everyone would come there for social meeting, for political gatherings, for connection, for community, for every single thing was part of that one entity, the church, right? So when we ask, is the church outdated? You have to, one, as we did before, kind of define what your context of church is, and then really understand how it has changed over time, right? So I don't know if even outdated is the right word to use, because what people used to go to church for was not strictly for spiritual development, for like self-development, right? It was for many different things that we can now get in other avenues, right? So you mentioned like social media, news, you can go online. There's so many other things you can get information from, right? So you mentioned using the church as like, hey, we have our faith and that we believe in everything that's being said here. That was sometimes the case for religious things and non-religious as well, right? So the church and what it is, was it initially was in the past, has pivoted because of the different avenues we're able to get information and get context from. So the question we have to ask ourselves now, right, that has changed. How does the church want to react to that? Because some churches are going and they're doing podcasts, right? They're doing live streaming, right? That didn't exist really. It's much more prevalent now post-COVID because we've had a change in our environment and how we do things. So now we have things on Zoom, right? So a lot of our connections are changing there. But we have to ask ourselves, is that kind of how we want to go? How do we want to use those avenues as tools, understanding that others also now have other avenues to accomplish some of the same things that church used to be there in the past?
Yeah, it's actually, when I was looking at a lot of stuff, it's interesting. You have to do those things to keep up and to be available, right? It's great to have online church when you're sick, something like when you just can't go, but also understanding that is what could be hurting in-person church attendance. So there's a really fine line that we have to walk and explain the importance of being a part of a physical community and being a part of physical worship that you can't get from online church, but it's still offering avenues, especially in an increasingly demanding society, which is also the flip side that is really tough right now, because I saw this video and it was a pastor giving a sermon, and he was talking about, he's like, yeah, me and my wife decided that we're just going to stop going to this hospital if they don't put in a playground. He said, because hospitals are a really boring place, man. You just can't get past it. And he said, no, that's ridiculous. He's like, hospitals serve a very specific purpose and they're necessary in society to serve that specific reason. So why would we then come to a church and say, you're not doing this and you're not doing this? And like basically the more that we're trying to go and be and get the culture, you could be turning into the gray and now offering all these other things, which is where the mega churches get a bad rap right now, right? Because they have the money and they offer all these things, but people feel like they're losing that specific, right? Like, oh, you offer coffee and you offer this and playgrounds and this and that and this, but you're giving a watered down sermon. I think the key here is offering transparency and still trying to meet people where they are, which again is such a really fine line, but I think that's really what the world and the culture is craving. It's the difference between, are we out here as Christ followers to change the culture, or are we responding and reacting to the culture and moving the way they want us to move? Are we going out there and changing them to be more like Christ?
I would just add to that, like, we've become more of a consumeristic society, right? And church has modeled that consumerism, creeped into the church and changed the way that we worship, right? Sometimes you can go and worship, may feel like a little bit of a concert. It feels like a performance. And sometimes you can like go to church and you're looking for like a message for me, like you said on one pod, one of our early ones, like we should be searching for conviction, not like the convenience of things. And so I think we have to, as the body of believers, right, we need to stick to, we have to be different. But like you said, there's a fine line where you're like, you want to be welcoming and you want to be, have things for people. And I don't know, man, it's a tough line to walk, because the more you start to like have all this stuff, the more the focus changes from being about Jesus and about the Word of God.
I think the less people the world respects you, the more you try to become like the world. That's why they're not moved or they're not fazed by the things that we're trying to do, because we're trying to be so much like them. Why would I come and feel no different? Because essentially, I mean, if you're not, they don't feel any presence in the sermon and they see people being the same way, why would that change?
You said, Ashley, earlier, the church needs to meet people where they are. And I agree completely with that. And I look at the life of Jesus, right? He literally met people where they were at, but he didn't compromise the word. Right. And I think that's where 2025 church needs to be. Yes, we need to meet people where they're at, whatever that looks like in that particular scenario, but the word can't be compromised. The fellowship can't be compromised. Church as a community can't be compromised, right? So I think that's something that we should always continue to strive for. I think that's something that I do in my life is the cliche saying, what would Jesus do? Mm-hmm. But literally, okay, I can see Jesus's life in the scriptures. Okay, I know Jesus, right? I have a relationship with Jesus. What would he do in this particular situation? And that's, I believe, the message for us as believers is to, yes, meet people where they're at, but not compromise the word.
There are valid reasons, and we can go into that as well, because I'm curious. There are valid reasons why people have left the church or refused to go to a church. There's so much church hurt. There's so much wrongs being done, not just pastors, but specifically by pastors that hold so much power. That's really, really tough. And why do we think that people take that one experience, right, one example, and then apply it to everywhere else? Because we don't do that outside of it, right? I don't meet one Brandon and say, all Brandons are bad because this Brandon did X, Y, and Z, and I don't want to get too controversial here, but in politics, right, or race, people will say, well, you can't just take one person of one race and apply that to everybody. So why do we do that for churches?
If I can answer that question right now, I would say it comes from this spirit of idolatry. Mm-hmm. We go to churches to hear a pastor, right? When I'm not trying to hear from God, I want to go listen to him preach or teach, whatever it is. And
this is what you said earlier about consumerism, right? So you're there for a concert, right? Yeah, right. We talked earlier about the church has multiple different facets of serving its community, right? So if you're going for a concert, you're going for self-help, you're going for these different things, the second the church stops doing those things, do I need to come anymore? You mentioned like, hey, I need to go to church to build a community. But let's just say I walk into church, I sit down, I listen to it, and I leave it. I don't talk to anybody. Am I building a community? I got friends, down the street. Why don't I just watch church on TV?
So how do we impact that mindset? Because that is 100% where we are as a culture. And we have to find a way to flip that narrative as believers, as the body believers, as a church. How do we change that?
Well, I think it starts with the work to undo church hurt. Well, one, it has to be received by an open heart, right? Mm-hmm. It can't fall on deaf ears. But on the second, you only fix that by true transparency. In, like, I could tell you all day long, come to my church, my pastor's really great. But if you've had a horrible experience, whether that be, somebody, maybe they were taken advantage of by, whether financially or maybe sexually abused, or even not even beyond that, just told wrong teaching, like right out the gates, you can only fix that by more and more people showing what it's meant to actually be. Like transparency leadership, we do that here at the church. We talk about where our finances are going. Pastor says all the time that if it's not from Bible, you need to question him. And that's laid out all there. He gives exact reasons. He tells you what scriptures he's referencing. He does a lot of research. Not every church gets that, but that's how you fix that, is more and more people doing that. I think that's the first step.
Yeah. It's definitely the first step. And then to add on to that, something that, God convicted me about last year actually was he's the one that's adding to the assembly, right? There was a situation in my life where I was trying to add to the assembly, increase the numbers, do all these sorts of things, meet people where they're at in order to increase the numbers when, God corrected me and was like, no, like that's not your job. Your job is to carry out the mission of the church, live according to the scriptures. And then at that point, as our pastor always says, it's Holy Spirit's job after that. And I think that's something hard for us to grasp in our generation, is giving up control, right? There's so many different things that we need to be in control of in our lives, and adding to the assembly is not one of those.
I don't want to say measure growth, measure impact, because in the church we measure by numbers a lot of times. I think that's the easiest thing to do. Like 300 people watch this video, 47 people were tuned into live stream. How do we get back to, hey, it's not about the numbers. If our church is 7 people, we're gonna be 7 believers strong. How do we get back there?
I would say personally, you can't do it like that. You can't do it, but I'm a numbers guy. I love numbers, right? But you cannot do it that way. It's exactly what Braylon was saying, because it's not about, hey, I brought this number of people in, because it's not going to be that obvious. It's going to be like exponential growth. So, hey, you're going to plant 10 seeds, and in one day, you're going to look at those seeds, there's going to be no growth. You're like, I did all this work for nothing. But you'll see when the harvest season comes, then they're going to start growing. Boom, 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 boom. And you think about from the time you planted to the time they actually grew, you did a lot of nothing. So you're thinking to myself, I did all this work and I got nothing, and now I did nothing and I got growth. Well, how's that possible? That's because it's faith that God's going to take care of it. Similar to what you were saying, right? It's not you and your direct action because you're so great and you did all these great things. You know why? It's not about you.
We're talking about like Acts 2:42 basically, right? They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and to breaking of bread and to prayer. And then later on, it talks about, and then God added to their number daily, those who were being saved. So, right, once we do those things, then it talks about how they were like filled with awe and the Holy Spirit. And so like our heart changes. And if our heart changes and we leave the assembly of believers and go out and somebody's like, dang, he's different. Dang, she's different. Then that's the impact. But we can't do it ourselves. We don't have the strength to do it ourselves.
It's instead of taking a numeric perspective on the metric, we need to take a spiritual perspective on that. So, for example, we had one new guest, we had X amount of views, we had, X amount of likes or whatever. We're looking at it or gauging it by the numbers. Okay, to flip that, what the church should be doing is, okay, how many baptisms do we have, right? How many marriages are we counseling, right? How many people are walking and displaying the fruits of the Spirit? That's what we really need to be focused on, not the number side of it. And I get that side of it too, don't get me wrong. But at a certain point, and we need to take the next step in our faith, and I believe the next step as a church is focusing on the spiritual side of the numbers, if you will.
Careful not to, because then you can get into... It should be a question and maybe not a metric, right? Because then you could fall into, I'm thinking of cults or people, right? Like people saying they're going to do things just so that they can like, oh, I'm going to get baptized just to say, I did it, or I'm going to do these things and follow. And it can get, I don't think, but there are some places that will try and look how great we're doing. And if I can just convince you, do you want to get baptized today? Right. And you maybe aren't ready for that step, but you think you are because you get, I don't want to say brainwashed, right? It's a good thing for that to happen, but still, like, you don't want to push people into doing things that they're not ready for.
It's like, Lord, I did all these things in your name. And then you get there and he's like, that wasn't for me. Like, be gone.
Right. So then you're still falling into doing exactly what the world thinks of the church, right? Because I think of all the time, right? Like, the question is the church outdated or still relevant? And then I ask the question, right, how does the culture really view the church? And every time I think about it, like, man, like PK asks all the time, right, what's stopping us from posting things about God on our social media? It's like anytime you say any little thing about Jesus on social media, even if it's not, you just come off as a fanatical. I don't know if you guys feel that way too, but like some of my followers who maybe are a little bit more worldly and not in the church, it's like you get less engagement on it. Oh, she's that weird Christian girl, or she loves Jesus a lot. But you just say that one thing and all of a sudden you're marked as intolerant. You're marked as somebody who, oh, well, I can't say certain things around her, which is, some things are fine. But
I mean, what you're saying, like cancel culture is real,
Yeah.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
I would look at it differently though. I would look at it from yourself individually. Think about what you can control, right? Back to what we were talking about earlier. There's things that you can control, things that you cannot control. What you can control is yourself to some degree and your time, right? So the question I have to ask myself, that's what's convicting to me, is, am I doing everything that I can in my time, my ability to develop myself and to bring others to Christ? And it's really the same question, because by developing yourself, you're able to bring others to Christ. If I'm not doing the best that I can do, then you're not doing enough. Yeah. That is the metric.
I was thinking about kind of what you were just saying, Ashley, and the hardest thing to do is, like, I guess just be the outcast as a believer. Like, just be comfortable being the, like, oh man, they just like a Jesus freak. Like, and then I thought about like Matthew 5:10, like, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So if we flip our mindset to where, like, that is a form of persecution. You know what I'm saying? Like, persecution isn't just stoning, right? There's like the social aspect of kind of what we go through as believers. And that may be part of it. And if we can kind of flip it to, okay, like, this is a blessing from God, then maybe I can still share and do these things, although it may feel like I'm being ostracized just a little bit. But at the same time, I think we have our unique ways of sharing the gospel, right? We all have people that we touch differently, that we reach differently, that may hear our voice differently. And I think those are spaces where each one of us, if we're going back to Brandon's point, like doing all we can to develop as believers and follow Christ's example, then that's how we can reach one and then let God do the rest.
That's a good point, though. And when you think about being ostracized, sometimes it can be a good thing, right? Yeah. Right. I've heard a story where, a guy was in a class and everyone was talking, oh, like, Jesus is not real, this and that. You're the only one standing up. And at the very end of the class, people came to him and were like, hey, man, I appreciate you standing up. Even though I wasn't taking your side, even though I was the one talking bad about you, right? I appreciate and I respect you for being the one to stand up for what you believe in. And that right there could be the way you win someone to Christ, just by doing that, even if they totally disagree.
So kind of to take it back to the original question, right? Is the church outdated or is it unshakable? To go into traditions, would you say traditions are helpful or hurtful towards either of those ideas?
What traditions?
Just any traditions, right? And that could be, like I mentioned before, in the Catholic Church, because that is a form, or, traditions of baptism or marriages, or doing things just anything that could be considered a tradition in the church.
Yeah, I'm still on the side of the church is definitely not outdated. I think the version of church here in 2025 and beyond is probably outdated for sure. But again, we got to get back to the purest form of the church, right? And to those traditions, I don't think that those traditions are necessarily bad, right? They're definitely, in my opinion, necessary. But I also would go back to, it's just a heart posture thing. If we're finessing some numbers or finessing some spiritual numbers to meet a metric, okay, well, then that's not, those traditions didn't really mean anything. Did God really receive your prayer if you're just praying to look cool on stage kind of thing? Yeah.
When I was preparing for this kind of both sides here, like at first one, I was like, yeah, like there was a lot of positives for traditions, right? One, in 2 Thessalonians 2:15, Paul instructs the believers to remain, like to hold fast to the traditions, to protect against these new age Christianity and things that are coming in, right? So that you are prepared and you can kind of, right, with these new megachurches or pastors that are saying certain things or whatever, you kind of already established in the roots. So roots are good. Traditions can be good. But then the problem comes to be is when tradition resists like contextual change. So some traditions, and I guess it depends again on what traditions were formed in specific cultural settings that no longer exist. And I think that's kind of where, right, whether that's, and you could go with the more, I guess, extreme, right? The churches that only allow the women to wear long dresses and you can't wear makeup. Or, again, in the Catholic Church, certain, like you can't be a part of baptisms unless you went through all of these sacraments, right? Like there are very rigid things. And when you hold on to them too tightly, when it has nothing to do with your salvation, that's when you can cause the issues to kind of bubble up. So it depends on the context. It depends on the traditions. But I do believe remaining steadfast, that's how you get the respect of the world, because it really creates unity and identity, right? That's how people can identify you, is by the traditions. It's a culture in and of itself. Church is culture. You go to another country and you can identify it by the clothes that they wear and the things that they speak, and you should be able to do the same with Christians.
I think some of the traditions are part of reverence, right? I was thinking about how even like now, it's cool coming to church in jeans and a t-shirt. And 20 years ago, I would have, what? My mom would have been like, put some clothes on. Like, what are we doing? Like, put on some slacks, put on some dress shoes, button down your shirt, tuck it in, let's go. And I think now, like, I was just thinking about it. Here now, word on like first Sunday, typically wear black. And I was looking around at like some of the elders and the more seasoned saints. They were suited. Yeah. And I was like, I want to do that. Yeah. I was like, it's not the outward appearance that matters, right? We know that. But I think it is a great show of reverence and the seriousness of like what we're doing, like on communion and like all that sort of stuff. And I think if we get too far and we just get too loose, then we lose that reverence, right? It's like, what am I doing? I'm just chilling. Like, I'll just pull up. I'll be sagging today, and respectfully, like, come as you are, right? 100% come as you are. I'm not saying that. But like, there's a reverence about being in the presence of God that I think we can lose if we get too far away from some traditions.
And I'd love to talk about, to take it back a little bit, in talking about traditions and things that were established, blue laws. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with blue laws, but essentially they're any laws that have to do with restricting things on Sunday, right? So right now in Texas still has a blue law. You can't sell liquor. Right. Like you can buy beer and wine, but you can't do it till after 12, and you can't sell any liquor above a certain percentage on Sundays. But it used to be more extreme than that. And so it actually started back Constantine. They didn't call it blue laws. They started calling it blue laws once it came to the Americas. First time we see this in Jamestown Colony. But the very first one was that they required all people to attend both morning and afternoon service. And then it kind of spiraled from there. You couldn't buy certain things. I think some car dealerships still aren't open on Sundays. That's a blue law. There are certain things you can't do in certain states. Well, yeah, not a law, but it's what they Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby holding down the fort. But what it helped do was create a reverence around Sundays. You didn't work. And that was because you had to go to morning and afternoon. You can't work around that. You couldn't buy certain tools. Like you could buy nails, but you couldn't buy a hammer. You can buy houseware goods. Like, and it varied by state, and there are still some really random things. But all that being said is you have a blue law. You're not supposed to work on Sunday, and it upholds this reverence and holiness of that day, which is interesting, tying it back to what we talked about being consumer in a church. All of that started changing consumerism in society. It didn't have anything to do with, it did have some, the non-believers and people who don't uphold that faith. They weren't really successful in trying to change those laws early on. The only reason why I think that started to change is because society wanted people to start consuming more and start working more and start doing these things. Right. Correct. But all of that is, imagine if we upheld things like that. My mom talked about when we were sharing about blue laws, and she was telling me, she goes, Sundays used to be way different, even just from when I was a kid. She goes, we used to ride in the car with my dad, and he would turn down the music every time we'd pass by a church. Then we'd turn it back up. But like you said, we are coming as we are. We're wearing whatever clothes, which is okay. But you do see the elders of the church who are still upholding those traditions of, I'm going to look nice and polished and tailored because this is the house of the Lord, and I'm going to come and look presentable. I'm not going to wear holes in my jeans or spaghetti straps or a crop top in some place that I know that this is meant, like God is with you everywhere, but we are welcoming him and we're trying to draw him in here. But it's just interesting that you talked about that specifically on First Sunday and kind of going towards that tradition and how far we've come since the 1700s and how different that looks today.
No, I agree. It's special, like when you really have a reverence for something, and it just creates that spirit. It's not really like, that's not going to welcome the Spirit of God, right? If I wear a suit or not. But I do believe that my actions in small choices that I can make just show up my heart posture a little bit. But it's hard because I'm not trying to say that just because I wear, and I'm a culprit of it, right? I've been here in jeans and a t-shirt. Like, it's important that we try that. There are some traditions we need to keep to keep our reverence.
Yeah, and I think that the traditions in general stem from history. That's the whole point of them, right? We need to remember where we came from, right? And they're different in different areas due to culture. It's kind of what we said before that as well. So, but culture does change, right? And that's why you've kind of seen that. So I think the high level answer is it depends, right? It depends on the situation.
And talking about overall relevancy, right? Because we're all going to be biased in this room because we go to church, and obviously the true nature is Scripture is always going to be relevant. But if the church were to be dispersed tomorrow, what would we truly lose?
I was having this conversation with a friend one day, and we were just talking about like the same sort of thing. Like, if the church closed down in whatever community, if Now Word was no longer on Nacogdoches, would the surrounding area feel it?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
And for Now Word, I don't know the answer. Well, I do know the answer. I'm trying not to be biased, but I believe yes. But there's also the other side of the coin is like, so many of us, like we live we live outside the community.
Right.
And so we commute in, right? Do we hang around? Do we fellowship in the building? Sure. Or in the parking lot? Sure. But there's something special about like when there's a community of believers that live in a space and can really impact that community. And so I said all that to say, like, it should, right? The community should feel that the church is not there. It should feel like not only the moral change, but like churches do so many other things, like different, if we're going to say social programming, it sounds so like corporate. Churches do so many good things, right? And influence the community through, like, I guess it's community service, because serving others is one of the things that we are called to do.
But would the building change? Like, would losing that change that? Right? look at other. Well, I was going to say, look at other countries right now. The hot thing, right, is Nigeria. Like, a lot of Christians who live in Nigeria they're being persecuted, whether either directly targeting their, and that happens. It's not just Nigeria, right? Yeah. That's just what's hot right now. I think we heard it in China, right? Like it's very limited there. they're not able to have a place, or they have a place and it gets destroyed. And that doesn't change anything. But then you look and you come to, right? Like we laugh because you're like, if something were to happen to the church, the roof were to fall off, be like, all right, y'all, we're going to live stream. Like people wouldn't come. They didn't come during Hurricane Harvey. I can tell you all the times that, because I lived right down the road, that I got called to be here, but we excused other people, right? And maybe some were good things, right? If safety wise and what have you. But how would that, it should change, right. But does it actually truly impact? Like maybe Now Word is an exception, but other churches in the area, let's talk about all churches, not just Now Word. If we were to go poof and that were to go away, would that actually change or impact the world?
We come to church, right, to worship God, but also in doing that, we hear one message corporately, right? So in that, it's something very, very important to hear a message, to hear from God in a corporate setting, right? And we can all agree, hopefully we can all agree that live stream, YouTube, it's just different, right? You don't necessarily get the same thing from it. And that was a product of COVID when we really experienced that. But if the church building were to go away, that's what I'm sitting here thinking about is, okay, how do we hear from God corporately? Yes, we can all hear from God through our own individual relationships, but like I said, there's something very, very powerful in hearing what God has to say in a corporate setting, whether that's prayer, whether that's the word, or what have you. But hearing from God corporately, I think that's something that would lose if the church building were to go away today.
I would challenge that. I would think about it, and why I would say that is because I would say it depends. One, because it depends on how well the churches as an organization, as a community, is connected. Is connected, right, on a community level. If the church, it has other groups, it has other communities where they're able to get that connection and that community outside of Sunday morning service, then in theory they should be as effective without that physical building. If you think about it, Jesus did not go to a physical building every Sunday. He was more effective than any of us, right? So if the building is the main thing holding together the meeting times and the community building of all the members, if that is the case, then yes. But that's not the case. There's other avenues. There's Wednesday night connects. There's all these other little breakouts. Then in theory, the community of the church and the building should continue to go forward. Now, the corporate message won't be there, sure, right? But the church is the community, not the building necessarily.
New Testament Acts, when Paul's going out in Corinthians, right? These are not big fellowships of believers, right? They're meeting in people's houses. It's like, it's grassroots, like that sort of thing. And so if Now Word were to poof, if the church universally, the buildings, then the believers should still be here and should still be seeking out one another, because that's one of the things that we're called to do.
And the question actually now to kind of transition and move towards wrap up would be, if Jesus were to come today and build a church, what would that look like? And maybe we're kind of already touching on that, but
I would challenge, would he come and build a physical building church? I would argue no. He went house to house, eating and drinking, talking to people in their homes, discipling, just being himself and spreading the word that way. He didn't necessarily have everyone come together in one building. Could he? Sure. Is that a way to do it? Absolutely. But it doesn't have to be that way, is what I would argue.
I would think, judging by how our society, how our culture that we live in is degrading, I don't know how many people would be there. I think, like the Bible tells us, like there's so many people that say, Lord, Lord, I did all this in your name. I alluded to it earlier. And then he's going to tell, like, go away from me, be gone from me. And so a lot of us who claim to be Christians and believers, when Jesus comes back, going to be left holding something. And it might not be like holding a bag, like, oh, I thought I was with you. Like, but then when he's looking through the book of life and he don't call your name, it's like, dang, when we look back at like our body of work,
So do you think, though, like that he would still do it the exact same way? And I ask that because as Jesus went along, right, and we read his story, he did different things with different believers, right? Woman at the well, the lady, and like he did the miracles of the loaves and the bread, right? He brought Lazarus back to life. He did different things and said different things to different people. So while it was still the same idea that, Jesus is, coming again, Savior, like the message remained the same, but he did kind of tailor it based on where he was going. So would he do that and tailor it to our world today? Would he change church based on this current state of the people who live in this world, not back in?
I think Jesus is going to get them. Like, so to answer the question, like the miracles he's performing and where he's going and how he's going to get souls and save souls, I think it would be in the culture of today. Like there's so many things in the Bible that are like specific to that culture that they were in, like the way it's written in the words, the verbiage they used. If it was today and we're talking about how Jesus came today, it would reflect the environment that we're in, I believe. And so I think, I was going to say something crazy. I think Jesus is going to get us where we are. Yeah. And there would be miracles performed that are more, I don't want to say relevant, but we may feel it more today because we can like identify with whatever that is. If that answers the question, I think.
You're talking about like how would he organize the church? Well, if the church is a community, then he would organize it and he would navigate his way through it how it is today, right? But of course, we have the same principles, the same truth, the same fundamentals. That would not change, right? That's what we talked about a little bit, like traditions and those type of things. As long as you have the fundamentals, you can get different people different ways. That's totally acceptable.
You would definitely meet people where they're at, but just to go back to what we said earlier, the message wouldn't change. Him trying to save your soul would be the message. I think about, how he talked to the Pharisees was different than how he talked to the woman at the well, right? It was different than how he talked to the disciples, right? So to Ashley's point, the verbiage or the way that you reach people, the way that he would reach people might be a little bit different depending on the situation. But at the end of the day, the message is still the same.
Thank you for pulling up a seat with us today in the room. We hope today's conversation challenged you, encouraged you, or gave you something deeper to think about. Don't forget to connect with us through social media, and if this episode spoke to you, share it and tag us. We'll see you next time for another relevant, faith-filled conversation. Until then, stay rooted, stay real, and stay in the room.